The morning air at Westbrook Military Academy was sharp and cold, the kind that made breath rise like smoke from a battlefield. A thin layer of fog hugged the perfectly maintained parade ground, shrouding the century-old buildings in ghostly white. The American flag hung still against its pole, waiting for the day's first breeze. The academy stood as it had since after the Gulf War, a fortress of tradition, discipline, and the promise of military excellence. From the window of his oak-paneled office, Colonel Marcus Whitaker observed the empty, ground-steaming coffee cup warming his weathered hands. At 62, his ramrod-straight posture betrayed nothing of the shrapnel still lodged near his spine, a souvenir from Desert Storm. The walls around him held the evidence of a life dedicated to service photos, with presidents, Rangers tabs, campaign medals, arranged in perfect order. His reflection in the window glass revealed the face of a man who had seen 3 wars and buried too many friends. "They're not ready," he murmured to himself, thinking of the current class of cadets. Young men and women who had never heard a shot fired in anger, never felt the weight of command decisions that sent others into harm's way. Brilliant on paper, perfect in drills, but untested by fire. His intercom buzzed. "Colonel Lieutenant Commander Hale has arrived." Whitaker nodded to himself. "Send her in." Perhaps she would change that. Across the academy, cadets assembled on the parade ground. Morning formation, crisp rows of pressed uniforms, polished boots, and expectant faces. They stood at rigid attention, rumors swirling about their new physical training instructor. "Heard it's some decorated veteran," whispered one cadet to another. "Better not be another screamer," replied another. "I've had enough of that from Sergeant Miller." Cadet Jason Reynolds stood at the front of the formation, his posture impeccable, his uniform spotless. As squad leader, he took pride in setting the example. At 24, with the strong jaw and confident bearing of a third-generation military man, Jason already carried himself with the authority of an officer. His father, Major General Thomas Reynolds, commanded the 10th Mountain Division. His grandfather had led men at Incheon. Military excellence ran in his blood, and he never let anyone forget it. "Attention," barked the senior cadet, and the formation snapped even straighter as Colonel Whitaker approached a figure beside him. What the cadets saw was not what they expected. Lieutenant Commander Eleanor "Ellie" Hale walked with quiet confidence, her stride measured and deliberate. No swagger, no intimidation tactics. She wore simple gray sweats instead of a dress uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. The only notable feature was a thin, pale scar that curved along her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. At 36, her face held the weathered look of someone who had spent years under harsh sun, yet her eyes remained clear and alert, constantly scanning her surroundings. "Cadets," Colonel Whitaker's voice carried across the formation without effort. "This is your new physical training instructor, Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hale." A ripple of whispers moved through the ranks. Lieutenant Commander, that was a Navy rank equivalent to an Army major, not the usual rank for a PT instructor. "Commander Hale brings extensive field experience to Westbrook. You will afford her every courtesy and respect due her rank and position. Commander, they're all yours." Eleanor stepped forward as Whitaker departed. She surveyed the formation with a measured gaze that seemed to catalog each face, each posture, each reaction. When she spoke, her voice was calm, neither loud nor soft, the voice of someone who knew she would be heard without shouting. "Good morning, cadets. We have much to accomplish together in the coming weeks. Today we'll establish baselines. 12 laps around the perimeter. Full gear." Jason shifted his weight slightly. "Ma'am, we typically begin with stretching protocols before him." "In my experience, Cadet Bema," she cut him off without raising her voice. "Enemies don't wait for you to stretch." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "But if you prefer, you can perform extra stretching exercises after everyone else finishes." Several cadets failed to suppress smiles. Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 12 laps. Begin now. The formation broke, cadets settling into their run around the half-mile perimeter. Eleanor joined them, maintaining a steady pace at the back of the group, observing form and endurance without comment. By the 4th lap, the formation had stretched out like an accordion, the strongest runners pulling ahead, the struggling ones falling behind. Jason maintained his position at the front, his stride confident, barely breaking a sweat. Beside him ran Cadet Michael Chen, a brilliant tactical student with dreams of Army intelligence. Several paces behind them, Cadet Annie Prescott kept a steady rhythm, her expression focused, determined. Who does she think she is? Jason muttered, between controlled breaths. 12 laps right off the bat. No proper warm-up, not even wearing a proper uniform. Michael matched his pace. Lieutenant Commander, though, that's not a rank they hand out to gym teachers. Probably some desk officer who needs field experience for promotion, Jason replied. Look at her, no command presence, no authority. My father says women officers are being fast-tracked now, politics over merit. On the 8th lap, Jason noticed something unsettling. While many cadets were showing signs of fatigue, heavier breathing, slowing pace, Eleanor maintained the same steady rhythm she'd started with. Her breathing remained controlled, her form economical, wasting no energy. She wasn't running to impress anyone. She was running like someone who had learned that endurance meant survival. By the final lap, even Jason felt the burn in his legs, the tightness in his chest. Eleanor, however, looked like she could go another 12 without difficulty. As they completed the run, she moved to the front, observing each cadet's condition as they finished. Form a line, she ordered once all had completed the circuit. Recovery positions. As the cadets caught their breath, she walked the line, making small adjustments to posture, offering brief comments on form. When she reached Jason, she paused. Your stride is too long on uphill sections, she said quietly. Shortening your step by 20% would conserve energy and maintain speed. Learn that carrying wounded through the Hindu Kush. Before Jason could respond, she had moved on. The casual reference to combat experience hung in the air between them like an undetonated explosive. Later in the academy mess hall, Jason sat with Michael and Annie picking at a plate of regulation eggs and toast. The morning's training session had left a sour taste that food couldn't erase. She's different, Annie said, breaking the silence. Not like our other instructors. Jason stabbed at his eggs. Different doesn't mean better. Who cares if she can run PT isn't combat leadership? Michael leaned forward, lowering his voice. I looked her up in the directory. She's not listed under regular faculty. There's just a mention of special instructor status in a security clearance level I couldn't access. My dad could find out with one phone call, Jason said, but made no move to reach for his phone. Annie studied him over her coffee cup. You're bothered because she corrected you in front of everyone. I'm bothered because she's treating PT like it's some kind of special ops indoctrination, Jason replied. Women haven't even been allowed in combat roles that long. There's no way she has the kind of experience she's hinting at. Captain Nichols is a woman, Annie pointed out, referring to their tactical operations instructor. 2 tours in Iraq. That's different, Jason insisted. Support roles probably. Look, there's a reason there are no women in Delta Force or the SEALs. The physical standards are impossible for them to meet. Annie raised an eyebrow. Impossible or just not allowed until recently? Jason pushed his tray away. Trust me on this. My father knows every major combat commander in the service. If she had any real combat experience, he'd know her name. Miles away from the academy, in a sparsely furnished apartment, Eleanor Hale sat at a small desk, a single lamp casting harsh light over the surface. Before her lay a worn leather journal and a small wooden box. Her fingers traced the edge of the box before slowly opening it. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a silver star, the nation's 3rd highest decoration for valor in combat. She didn't touch the metal. She never did anymore. Instead, she opened the journal, flipping to a page marked with the faded photograph. 5 men and 1 woman herself standing before a helicopter, faces dusty expressions, grim but determined. On the bottom, written in fading ink, Helmand Province Team 6 Operation Heron's Flight. Eleanor closed her eyes. In the academy, the apartment, the present day, all dissolved. The air in Helmand Province tasted like dust and cordite. Rounds cracked overhead as Eleanor and Lieutenant Daniel Brooks moved in synchronized rushes toward the downed helicopter. The Taliban ambush had come without warning, catching their extraction team exposed on 3 sides. 2 wounded inside, Brooks shouted over the radio. Walsh is hit bad. Eleanor signaled understanding, then pointed to the flanking route they would take. No words needed, they'd run this drill countless times, had operated together through 17 previous missions. Brooks nodded, once his eyes showing absolute trust in her judgment. They moved as a single unit, covering each other through alternating fire and movement. When they reached the helicopter, Eleanor provided covering fire while Brooks assessed the wounded. Walsh needs immediate evac, Brooks reported, his voice tight. Arterial bleed leg. Eleanor keyed her radio. Sierra Actual, this is Ghost 6. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Request immediate dust-off at secondary LZ. The radio crackled with confirmation as Eleanor helped Brooks apply a tourniquet to Walsh's shattered leg. The young SEAL's face had gone gray with blood loss, but his eyes remained focused, determined. "Stay with us, Walsh," she ordered. "That's an order." "Yes, ma'am," he managed through gritted teeth. As they prepared to move, the distinctive whoosh of an RPG tore through the air. Eleanor's head snapped up, tracking the sound to its source. "RPG down!" she shouted, but Brooks was already moving not down but toward her, his body slamming into hers with bone-crushing force, driving her behind the helicopter's landing gear as the world exploded into fire and shrapnel. The blast threw them both backward. Eleanor's ears rang with deafening intensity as she scrambled to her feet. Her hands found Brooks, rolled him over. His vest had caught most of the shrapnel, but a jagged piece had found the unprotected side of his neck. Blood pulsed between her fingers as she applied pressure. "Medic!" she screamed, all radio protocol forgotten. "Man down!" Brooks gripped her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes locked on hers. "The team," he gasped. "Get them out, Hale. Lead them home." "We're all going home," she insisted, pressing harder on the wound. "Stay with me, Daniel." His lips formed words she couldn't hear over the gunfire, but she read them clearly. "That's an order." Then his grip slackened and something vital faded from his eyes, leaving behind only a reflection of the Afghan sky. Eleanor's eyes snapped open, her hand unconsciously moving to the scar on her neck. Her own souvenir from that day. Shrapnel from the same RPG that took Brooks. She'd received the Silver Star for what happened next, reorganizing the team, establishing a defensive perimeter, coordinating the evacuation of the wounded, while calling in air support, all with a piece of metal embedded in her neck. The metal meant nothing compared to the loss. Brooks had been the finest officer she'd ever served with, and his final order to lead had become her guiding principle. She closed the journal and returned the box to its shelf. Tomorrow would test another group of would-be leaders. She would not fail them, even if they didn't yet understand what she had to teach. The next morning broke gray and dismal rain sheeting down across the academy grounds, turning the parade ground into a muddy expanse. Perfect. Eleanor stood at the edge of the training field, unfazed by the downpour. Her expression remained neutral as the cadets assembled, raindrops streaming down their faces, uniforms already soaking through. "Today," she announced once they had formed up, "we focus on tactical movement under adverse conditions. In the field, you don't get to choose your weather or terrain. The mission continues regardless." She gestured to the obstacle course she had modified overnight. Low barbed wire strung over mud pits. Narrow balance beams slick with rain. Climbing walls with minimal handholds. "This isn't about showing off or breaking records," she continued. "This is about methodical progress under pressure. Out there," she pointed to the horizon, "rushing gets people killed. Precision and discipline save lives." Jason surveyed the course with thinly veiled disdain. "MAM regulations specify that obstacle training should be postponed during severe weather conditions for safety reasons." Eleanor turned to him slowly, rain streaming down her face. "Cadet Reynolds, are you concerned about safety or about getting your uniform dirty?" A few stifled laughs emerged from the formation. Jason's face flushed. "I'm concerned about proper protocols, ma'am." "Protocols," Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me, Cadet, when your transport is hit by an IED and you're evacuating wounded under fire in a monsoon, which protocol covers that scenario?" Jason had no answer. "The ground doesn't care about your family name," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying to the entire formation despite the rainfall. "It doesn't respect rank or protocols. It tests you equally without mercy or favor." She turned to address everyone. "First evolution, low crawl under wire 20 yards. Maintain weapon control at all times. Training rifles have been placed at the starting line. When you reach the end, recover to standing position and return to formation. First squad, move out." The cadets broke formation, collecting the weighted training rifles before taking positions at the starting line. The first group began their crawl, immediately struggling with the slick mud that seemed determined to swallow elbows and knees with each movement. Eleanor moved alongside the course, observing technique without interference. Most cadets adopted an inefficient crawl, failing to use their legs properly, allowing their backs to rise too high, risking the wire. When Jason's turn came, he attacked the course with determination, moving faster than the others, but with a technique that betrayed his lack of real field experience. Halfway through his rifle sling, caught on the wire, jerking him to a stop. Frustrated, he yanked at the weapon, causing the wire to bounce and snag the cadet behind him. Eleanor appeared beside him, kneeling in the mud without hesitation. "Control, not speed," she said quietly. "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast." With practiced ease, she demonstrated the proper unwinding technique, then continued. "When you rush, you make mistakes. Mistakes get your team killed." Jason freed himself and continued, but his expression had darkened considerably. When he completed the course, mud coating every inch of his uniform, he rejoined the formation with barely contained frustration. As the morning progressed, Eleanor increased the complexity of the drills. The rain intensified, turning the training ground into a quagmire that sapped strength and tested patience. Through it all, she maintained the same calm demeanor, demonstrating techniques when necessary, offering corrections without raising her voice. During a brief water break, Cadet Prescott approached her cautiously. "Commander Hale," Annie began, "may I ask the purpose of these specific drills? They seem different from our standard PT regimen." Eleanor regarded her thoughtfully. "What's your career path, Cadet Prescott?" "Military intelligence, ma'am. Hopefully field operations." Eleanor nodded. "Then you need to understand that intelligence is only as good as the operator who collects it. These drills teach you to think clearly when your body is screaming for relief. They teach you to maintain awareness when every instinct wants you to focus only on your discomfort." Before Annie could respond, Jason's voice cut through the rain. "With respect, ma'am, these drills seem more suited to special operations training than officer preparation. Most of us are headed for conventional units." Several cadets had gathered around, watching the exchange with interest. Eleanor studied Jason for a moment, then looked at the assembled group. "You think this is special operations training?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "This is kindergarten compared to what real operators endure." Jason's posture stiffened. "Then perhaps our time would be better spent on relevant training, ma'am." The challenge hung in the air between them. The other cadets held their breath, surprised by Jason's boldness. Eleanor regarded him silently, rainwater streaming down her face, her eyes never leaving his. Then without a word, she removed her instructor's windbreaker and handed it to Annie. Beneath it, her t-shirt clung to a frame lean with muscle, not the bulky strength of a weightlifter, but the functional power of someone forged through years of real-world demands. "Observe," she said simply. What followed left the cadets in stunned silence. Eleanor moved through the obstacle course with a fluid grace that made their earlier attempts look like children stumbling through their first steps. She navigated the mud with minimal disturbance, her body maintaining perfect contact with the ground under the wire. At the wall, she ascended with such efficient movement that she seemed to flow upward rather than climb. Through it all, her breathing remained controlled, her weapon never once losing its proper position. She completed the entire course in less than half the time of the fastest cadet, with none of the struggle or discomfort they had displayed. When she finished, she walked back to the group, mud-coating her uniform, but her composure entirely intact. "Relevant enough for you, Cadet Reynolds?" she asked quietly. Michael whispered to Annie, "That wasn't standard officer training." Annie nodded slightly. "I've never seen movement like that outside of..." "Outside of what?" Jason demanded, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Combat footage," she replied. "Tier 1 operators." Eleanor called the group back to attention. "Final evolution. Team movement under the wire with simulated casualty extraction. Cadets will be divided into 4-person teams. Each team must navigate the full course while carrying a wounded team member on a stretcher. Coordinated movement is essential. First team: Reynolds, Chen, Prescott, and Davis." Jason found himself designated as team leader with Michael, Annie, and Davis, the largest cadet in the class, as his squad. They were given a standard-issue field stretcher and a weighted training dummy. "Sir, with all due respect," he began, addressing Eleanor with the incorrect honorific deliberately. "This exercise is..." "Begin now, cadet," she interrupted, her voice taking on a harder edge than they had heard before. "Your wounded comrade is losing blood while you're complaining about the exercise." Fuming, Jason organized his team, placing the dummy on the stretcher and assigning positions. The weight was considerable, especially in the treacherous mud. As they approached the wire section, the real challenge became apparent. The stretcher would barely fit underneath, requiring perfect coordination between all 4 team members. Lower, Jason ordered as they struggled under the wire. Davis, keep your end down. Davis, already straining under the weight, tried to adjust, but slipped in the mud, causing the stretcher to tilt and nearly spill the dummy. Steady, Jason barked. Chen takes some of the weight from Davis. They maneuvered slowly, painfully through the mud, each yard a battle against exhaustion and the elements. Jason, in the lead position, found himself growing increasingly frustrated with his team's performance. Eleanor walked alongside, observing, without comment, her presence adding to Jason's agitation. When they reached the halfway point, she finally spoke. Your team is struggling because your commands are reactive, not proactive. You're not reading the terrain ahead, Cadet Reynolds. We're doing fine, ma'am, Jason replied through gritted teeth. Your wounded would have bled out by now, she countered calmly. And Davis is about to collapse from exhaustion because you've positioned him incorrectly for his height and strength. Jason felt his control slipping. The rain, the mud, the weight of the stretcher, and now this woman questioning his leadership, it all converged into a burning knot of anger. Perhaps you'd like to demonstrate the proper technique, ma'am, he said, voice thick with sarcasm. I would, she replied evenly, but I learned long ago that some lessons must be experienced, not demonstrated. As they struggled through the final section, Davis's footing gave way completely. The stretcher lurched, and in trying to compensate, Jason also lost his balance. As he stumbled, Eleanor moved to stabilize the stretcher from his side. Something in Jason snapped. In a moment of pure frustration, he straightened abruptly, his shoulder connecting with Eleanor's chest, shoving her backward into the mud. The action was instinctive, unplanned, but unmistakably deliberate. Time seemed to stop. The other cadets froze in place, shock evident on their faces. Even Jason looked stunned at his own action, the color draining from his face as he realized what he had done. Eleanor lay in the mud for just a moment, then rose with deliberate calm. Mud caked her uniform, streaked her face, but her eyes, those were different now. The professional reserve had vanished, replaced by something cold and evaluating. Not anger, but the calculating gaze of a predator assessing a threat. The change was subtle but profound, and every cadet felt it. This was not the look of an instructor. This was the look of someone who had faced death and dealt it in return. Exercise terminated, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that silenced the entire field. All cadets except Reynolds returned to barracks and clean up. As the others hesitantly departed, casting nervous glances back at Jason, Eleanor approached him slowly. She stopped an arm's length away, studying him with that unnerving gaze. Do you know what you just did, cadet? She asked. Jason stood at rigid attention, eyes forward. I assaulted a superior officer, ma'am. I accept whatever punishment. No, she cut him off. In tactical terms, what you just did was compromise your entire team. In the field, your action would have left the wounded, exposed your team, disorganized, and likely resulted in additional casualties. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so that only he could hear her next words. On my last operation in Helmand Province, a moment of frustration like that cost the life of the finest officer I've ever known. Jason's eyes widened slightly, the only break in his rigid posture. You report to the obstacle course at 100 Tefuro. She continued, her voice returning to its normal volume. You will undergo a special training evolution designed specifically for Yuku. 24 hours of continuous operation. Come prepared. She turned to leave, then stopped. And Cadet Reynolds, bring only what you can carry for 20 miles. You'll need every ounce of that famous family endurance you're so proud of. As Eleanor walked away across the muddy field, back straight, despite the mud coating her uniform, Jason stood motionless in the rain. For the first time since arriving at the academy, something akin to genuine fear flickered across his face. Back in her office, Eleanor stripped off her mud-soaked uniform and changed into dry clothes. Her movements were precise, economical, betraying none of the anger or frustration a normal instructor might feel. Instead, she was calculating, planning the next day's evolution with the same care she would plan a combat operation. Colonel Whitaker knocked once before entering. He surveyed her appearance in the mud-tracked floor with a raised eyebrow. I just had an interesting conversation with Cadet Prescott, he said, closing the door behind him. Something about an incident during training, Eleanor continued, organizing her gear. Nothing I can't handle. Reynolds physically pushed you. He did. Whitaker sighed heavily. His father is going to have kittens when he hears about this. Major General Reynolds has direct access to the Joint Chiefs, Eleanor. Now she looked up, meeting his gaze steadily. Are you ordering me to overlook it? Hell no, Whitaker replied immediately. That boy needs discipline, but I need to know your plan before his father starts making phone calls. Eleanor nodded once. I'm going to teach him what his father never did, that his name won't protect him in the field, that frustration gets people killed, and that true leadership comes from respect, not entitlement. Whitaker studied her for a long moment. You're not going to break him, are you, Ellie? Because despite his attitude, that kid has potential. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. I don't break people, Marcus. I rebuild them. She picked up a folder from her desk. The same way your friend Jack Hale helped rebuild me after I lost my father. Whitaker's expression softened at the mention of her father, his former comrade in Desert Storm. Jack would be proud of you, Ellie. Not many survive what you did in Afghanistan, let alone go on to become what you became. She shook her head slightly. 187 combat operations, Marcus. I survived, others didn't. The least I can do is make sure these cadets understand what real leadership costs before they have to learn it the hard way. Whitaker nodded solemnly, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I think Brooks would approve of your methods. After he left, Eleanor sat at her desk, opened the folder, and reviewed Jason Reynolds' file again. Perfect academic scores, outstanding physical fitness, impeccable family connections. On paper, the ideal officer candidate, yet lacking the one thing no academy could teach: the humility that comes from genuine struggle. She closed the file and gazed out at the rain-soaked parade ground. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Jason Reynolds would begin to understand what it truly meant to lead, and perhaps in teaching him, she would finally fulfill the last order Brooks had given her to lead them home. Dawn broke over Westbrook Military Academy in a symphony of gray and gold, the sun struggling against lingering rain clouds. The obstacle course stood silent in expectant puddles from yesterday's downpour, reflecting the first tentative rays of morning light. The mud had settled overnight into a treacherous mixture, not quite liquid, not quite solid, perfect for the lesson that awaited. Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hale arrived at 0445, 15 minutes before the appointed time. She moved with the same measured confidence that marked all her actions, carrying a rucksack that looked deceptively ordinary, but contained equipment carefully selected for the day ahead. She wore standard-issue BDUs, her hair pulled back in its customary tight bun, her boots already spattered with mud from her walk across the field. She took position at the center of the course and waited, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. This was familiar, the quiet before action, the anticipation of what was to come. She had stood like this before countless operations, that same stillness, masking the absolute focus within. At 0458, Cadet Jason Reynolds appeared at the edge of the field. He approached with military precision, his uniform immaculate despite the early hour, his own rucksack slung over his shoulders. His face betrayed nothing but the tightness around his eyes, spoke of a restless night. Reporting as ordered, ma'am, he said, stopping at attention before her. Eleanor studied him without speaking, noting his preparation, his posture, the calculated neutrality of his expression. After yesterday's incident, he had clearly decided to project perfect military bearing. Do you know why you're here, Cadet Reynolds? She finally asked, her voice quiet in the stillness of the morning. To receive disciplinary training for my actions yesterday, ma'am. No, she shook her head slightly. Discipline is what prevents yesterday's actions. This isn't punishment, Reynolds. This is education. She gestured to his rucksack. What did you bring? Standard field load, ma'am. Water rations, first aid kit, spare socks, rain gear. Good, she nodded once. Now empty it. Confusion flickered across his face, but he complied, kneeling to spread his gear on the ground. Eleanor knelt opposite him, opening her own rucksack. Today's evolution will test more than your physical stamina, Reynolds. It will test your judgment, your adaptability, and most importantly, your ability to follow direction without understanding the full mission. She began transferring items from her pack to his: an encrypted radio, a laminated map in a waterproof case, a compass with unusual markings, a small device that looked like a specialized GPS unit. In the field, she continued, you rarely have complete information. You execute your portion of the mission with the tools and intel provided, trusting that your commander has the full picture. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Today I am your commander, and you will complete a series of tasks without knowing their purpose or the overall objective? Jason's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he remained silent, watching as she reorganized his gear. Eleanor stood and Jason followed suit. Your first task begins now. You will navigate to these coordinates. She handed him a sealed envelope. Inside are your instructions. Open it only when you reach the location. You have 40 minutes. Jason studied the coordinates. This is nearly 5 miles from the academy, ma'am. Then I suggest you start moving, cadet. Time is already counting down. Without another word, Jason shouldered his reconfigured pack and set off at a steady jog, disappearing into the tree line that bordered the academy grounds. Eleanor watched him go, then reached for her radio. Whitaker, this is Hale. First evolution underway. Acknowledged, came the colonel's voice. The observation team is in position. Try not to break the general's sun on the first day, Commander. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. No promises, sir. Eleanor retrieved a small tablet from her remaining gear and activated it, revealing a tracking screen showing Jason's position. Then she moved to her vehicle, a nondescript Jeep parked at the edge of the field. She had a long day ahead and multiple locations to monitor. In his office, Colonel Marcus Whitaker hung up the radio and turned to his visitor, who sat watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Is this really necessary, Marcus? Asked Major General Thomas Reynolds, his uniform crisp despite the early hour, the stars on his shoulders catching the light. Putting my son through some kind of special operations endurance test seems excessive for a moment of lost temper. Whitaker leaned back in his chair, regarding his old friend carefully. Tom, you asked me to ensure Jason received the best training possible. You specifically requested no special treatment. That was before your new PT instructor decided to turn a standard training exercise into some kind of SEER simulation. Whitaker's expression remained neutral. Lieutenant Commander Hale designs her training based on experience, not tradition. I trust her judgment. A lieutenant commander running PT for cadets. Reynolds shook his head. Seems an unusual assignment for someone of that rank. Eleanor Hale is an unusual officer. Reynolds studied his old friend for a moment. You know her well. I served with her father in Desert Storm. Jack Hale was one of the finest Marines I ever knew. Whitaker paused, choosing his next words carefully. His daughter has followed her own path, but she carries his legacy of excellence. That doesn't explain why a Navy officer is instructing at an Army academy, Marcus. Whitaker smiled thinly. Some things are still compartmentalized, Tom, even at your level. Let's just say that Commander Hale brings a unique perspective our cadets would benefit from experiencing. Reynolds frowned. You're being deliberately vague. I am. Whitaker nodded without apology. And I recommend allowing today's training to proceed without interference. Your son has potential, but potential without proper tempering is just untested metal. The general stood, straightening his jacket. Keep me informed. If this goes too far, I'll expect you to step in. I always do what's necessary, Tom. You know that. After the general departed, Whitaker turned to stare out his window at the distant training grounds, his expression thoughtful. Eleanor Hale's methods might be unorthodox, but he had witnessed their effectiveness firsthand. Still, he made a note to check in periodically throughout the day. Jason Reynolds wasn't the only one being tested. Miles away, Jason moved through dense woodland at a steady pace, his mind racing faster than his feet. The coordinates had led him deep into the academy's extended training grounds, far from the manicured parade fields and obstacle courses. Here, nature ruled tangled undergrowth, fallen logs, sudden ravines. Navigating the terrain required concentration and constant adjustment. This wasn't standard cadet training. The realization had been growing since he'd opened the first sealed envelope. The instructions inside had been cryptic. Locate the supply cache. Extract only what you need. Proceed to secondary coordinates. Avoid detection by roving patrols. Supply cache roving patrols. This was beginning to feel like the special operations scenarios his father sometimes described from his early career. Jason paused at the edge of a small clearing, consulting his map. The secondary coordinates should be just ahead, but Commander Hale's warning about patrols made him hesitate before crossing the open ground. He scanned the tree line on the opposite side, looking for movement or unusual shapes. Nothing visible, but instinct or perhaps the commander's warnings made him circle the clearing instead of crossing directly. The detour cost precious minutes, but as he approached the coordinates from cover, he spotted them, 2 academy staff members in Woodland camouflage, carrying training rifles positioned exactly where he would have emerged had he taken the direct route. A test then, and one he might have failed without the commander's warning. Jason checked his watch. 32 minutes elapsed. He needed to locate the next marker quickly. Staying low, he worked his way through the underbrush until he reached the exact coordinates. There, partially concealed beneath fallen leaves, lay another sealed envelope. This one contained a single sheet with a series of riddles. Military riddles, he realized after reading the first. Each one pointed to a specific location on the academy grounds, forming a complex route that would take hours to complete if followed correctly. Jason committed the riddles to memory, then carefully refolded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. As he rose to move out, a voice called from directly behind him. "You've been spotted, cadet. Mission compromised." Jason whirled to find Commander Hale standing less than 10 feet away, watching him with that same unnervingly calm expression. He hadn't heard her approach, not a single footfall, not a rustling leaf. "How?" he began, but she cut him off with a raised hand. "First lesson, cadet. Always secure your perimeter. In the field, that lapse would have cost lives." Jason straightened, frustration evident despite his attempt at military bearing. "With respect, ma'am, these aren't field conditions. This is a training exercise." Eleanor approached slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Every exercise is preparation for the field. Every moment of training should reflect the realities you'll face when lives depend on your decisions." She gestured to the envelope in his pocket. "You've retrieved your next instructions. Continue the evolution." "Ma'am, these riddles could take all day to—" "Then I suggest you apply yourself, cadet. Your 40-minute window for this phase begins now." Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the forest, moving with that same silent efficiency that had allowed her to approach undetected. Jason stood alone in the small clearing, the weight of the rucksack suddenly heavier on his shoulders. Whatever game Commander Hale was playing, it was unlike any training he had experienced at the academy. Despite himself, a flicker of respect began to form beneath his frustration. Back at the Academy, cadets Michael Chen and Annie Prescott sat in the library, ostensibly studying tactical operations manuals, but their conversation had nothing to do with the text before them. "It doesn't make sense," Michael said quietly. "I checked the faculty roster again. Commander Hale doesn't appear anywhere except as special instructor. No background, no service history, no specialization listed." Annie frowned, tapping her pencil against her notebook. "What about her name badge? Navy lieutenant commanders should have their warfare qualification pins displayed." "That's just it," Michael replied. "She doesn't wear one, just the rank insignia." "Could be intelligence," Annie suggested. "They sometimes maintain lower profiles." Michael shook his head. "Intelligence officers still have service records. This is something else." He leaned forward, lowering his voice further. "I did find something, though. A small mention in a declassified after-action report from Afghanistan 2012. A Lieutenant E. Hale was cited for exceptional leadership under fire during an extraction operation gone wrong. The rest was redacted." Annie's eyes widened slightly. "Afghanistan 2012. That was during the surge. Heavy combat operations." "Exactly. And her comment yesterday about the Hindu Kush, that's Afghanistan." Michael closed his book. "Whatever she did before coming here, it wasn't sitting behind a desk." "You think Reynolds is in trouble?" Annie asked, glancing toward the window where rain had begun falling, again pattering softly against the glass. Michael considered for a moment. "I think he's getting exactly what he needs." By midday, Jason Reynolds was soaked, exhausted, and beginning to understand the true nature of Commander Hale's education. The series of riddles had led him on a grueling route across the Academy's extended training grounds, covering nearly 15 miles of difficult terrain. At each location, he had found new instructions, new challenges, and occasionally Commander Hale herself materializing like a ghost to observe, correct, or simply watch in silence before disappearing again. The physical demands were intense but manageable. It was the mental pressure that wore at him, constantly analyzing, adapting, making decisions without full information. Several times he had been ambushed by staff members playing the role of opposing forces, forcing him to evade and recalculate his route. Now stumbling through a rocky stream bed, his boots waterlogged and feet beginning to blister, Jason found himself at the coordinates specified in the last envelope. Here, nestled against the base of a large oak, sat Commander Hale, calmly eating from a small ration pack. Beside her lay a similar package. "Sit, cadet," she said, gesturing to the spot across from her. 12 minutes for nutrition and hydration." Jason sank gratefully onto the damp ground, accepting the ration pack she slid toward him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, a detail that didn't escape her notice. "You're past the initial stages of fatigue," she observed. "Now comes the test of endurance. Eat slowly, small bites. Your body needs time to process." Jason followed her instructions without argument, too tired for his usual defiance. After several minutes of silence, he finally spoke. "Permission to ask a question, ma'am?" "Granted. What is the purpose of this exercise beyond testing my endurance?" Eleanor studied him for a moment before answering. "In Afghanistan, I once spent 72 hours on a mission that was supposed to last 12. No resupply, minimal communication, continuous movement through hostile territory. The objective kept changing as the situation evolved." She took a sip from her water bottle. "When the extraction finally came, half my team was wounded and I was operating on instinct alone, my conscious mind too exhausted for complex thought." She leaned forward slightly. "That's when training matters most, cadet. When your body is broken and your mind is foggy but lives still depend on your next decision." "You were in Afghanistan combat operations?" Jason asked, unable to hide his surprise. Eleanor's expression remained unchanged. 14 deployments, 187 combat missions. The number hung in the air between them. 187, each one a potential death sentence, each one requiring the kind of leadership that couldn't be taught in a classroom. "I didn't know," Jason said quietly. "Most don't." Eleanor checked her watch. 2 minutes remaining. "Finish your water." As Jason complied, he studied her with new eyes, noticing details he had overlooked before: the way she continuously scanned their surroundings, even while resting, the efficient economy of every movement, the weathered quality of her hands that had clearly done more than grade papers or demonstrate PT exercises. "The next phase will test your decision-making under pressure." She continued, gathering her gear. "You'll be provided with limited intelligence about a simulated hostage situation. You'll plan and execute a reconnaissance of the target area, then propose an extraction plan." "Alone?" Jason asked. "Leadership is often lonely, cadet." She stood shouldering her pack. "Field commanders must make decisions that weigh lives against objectives, often with incomplete information and insufficient resources. Like your mission in Afghanistan." Something flickered briefly in her eyes, a shadow of memory quickly controlled. "Yes, like that." Before he could respond, she handed him another sealed envelope. "Your briefing. You have 30 minutes to develop your approach, then you'll move to the observation point here." She indicated a position on his map. "I'll evaluate your plan on site." With that, she moved off into the forest once again, leaving Jason alone with a new set of challenges. But as he opened the envelope, his exhaustion was temporarily forgotten, replaced by a growing sense that he was being tested for something far more significant than a routine disciplinary action. In his office, Colonel Whitaker received the midday update from the observation team tracking Jason's progress. "He's holding up well," reported Captain Lewis over the secure channel. "Completed all navigation points within parameters. Commander Hale has him setting up for the reconnaissance phase now." "And his attitude?" Whitaker asked. "Improving, sir. Less resistance, more focus on the tasks. The commander's approach seems to be working." "It usually does," Whitaker replied, thinking back to his own experience with Eleanor Hale during a joint operation 3 years earlier. He had witnessed firsthand her ability to transform a fractured unit into a cohesive team through similar methods, demanding excellence while providing just enough guidance to allow for genuine growth. "Maintain observation, Captain. Report any significant developments." After signing off, Whitaker leaned back in his chair, considering the delicate balance he was maintaining. General Reynolds had checked in twice already, his concern for his son barely masked by professional inquiry. The Academy's training director had expressed reservations about non-standard protocols. Yet Whitaker had held firm, trusting Eleanor's judgment and methods. Some lessons couldn't be taught by manual or lecture. Some truths had to be experienced, especially for those destined for command positions. Jason Reynolds, with his family connections and natural abilities, would almost certainly rise to significant rank, which made it all the more critical that he understand the true meaning of leadership before lives depended on his decisions. Whitaker glanced at the photograph on his wall himself and Jack Hale in Desert Storm, young officers with desert dust coating their uniforms and the weight of command in their eyes. Jack had understood leadership instinctively, had demonstrated it daily until the RPG that claimed his life in the war's final days. His daughter carried that same instinctive understanding, though she had forged it in a different crucible. Whitaker only hoped that young Reynolds would recognize the value of the lesson before him, expensive though it might be to his pride. Miles away, concealed in thick underbrush on a ridgeline, Jason Reynolds lay motionless, observing the target area through field glasses. The scenario Commander Hale had created was impressively detailed, a small clearing containing 2 academy buildings repurposed as a hostile compound. Staff members playing the roles of guards patrolling in realistic patterns, even simulated communications equipment visible through the windows. For the past hour, he had been meticulously recording guard rotations, identifying potential entry points, and mapping the surrounding terrain. The hostage, a training dummy positioned visibly in one building, was under constant surveillance from at least 2 guards at all times. "What do you see?" Commander Hale's voice came from directly beside him, though he hadn't heard her approach. This time, he managed to control his startled reaction, keeping his body still and his focus on the objective. "4 guards on rotating patrol," he replied quietly. "2 stationary at the main entrance. Communication equipment in the northeast building suggests a command post. The hostage is held in the southwest building, 2nd floor, with visual surveillance from both guard posts." He shifted slightly, adjusting his position to reduce strain on his elbows. "Standard approach would be impossible without detection. However, there's a drainage culvert on the western perimeter that appears unmonitored. It might provide access to the compound if it's large enough to traverse." Eleanor made no comment, simply observing alongside him for several minutes. The silence stretched between them, but Jason maintained his focus, continuing to catalog details that might prove relevant to an extraction plan. Finally, she spoke. "You've been here for 63 minutes without moving, Cadet. Most beginners shift position every 10 minutes, compromising their concealment." It wasn't quite praise, but Jason felt a small surge of satisfaction nonetheless. "Your assessment is thorough," she continued, "but incomplete. What haven't you considered?" Jason frowned, mentally reviewing his observations. Weather conditions could change visibility. Night would provide better cover, but reduce our own visual capability without proper equipment. "Think broader," she prompted, "beyond tactical considerations." Jason hesitated, then ventured, "The hostage's condition, if injured, extraction becomes more complicated." "Broader still." Frustration flickered across his face. "Ma'am, I don't—" "Why are they holding a hostage, Cadet?" she interrupted. "What's their motivation? What leverage are they seeking? How does that affect their behavior and decision-making?" The questions landed like stones, rippling through Jason's understanding of the scenario. He had approached it as a purely tactical problem, not considering the human and strategic dimensions. "In Helmand Province," Eleanor continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, "we were sent to extract a high-value intelligence asset captured by insurgents. Our initial assessment was similar to yours, focused on entry points, guard patterns, optimal timing. But we failed to consider why they hadn't already executed their captive." She turned to look at him directly. "They were waiting for someone more valuable. The capture was bait for a trap. We walked right into it because we didn't ask the right questions." The implication hung in the air between them. This wasn't just a training exercise. It was a lesson drawn from blood and sacrifice. "Lieutenant Brooks led that mission," she added quietly. "He paid for our oversight with his life." "Brooks," Jason asked, the name striking a chord of familiarity. "Daniel Brooks, the finest officer I ever served with. He threw himself on an RPG to save the rest of the team after our extraction went sideways." For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and Jason glimpsed something raw and genuine in her expression. A grief still carried, a loss still felt. Then it was gone, replaced by the calm, evaluating gaze he had come to recognize. "Reassess the scenario," she ordered. "Consider all dimensions of the problem. Then develop your plan. You have 30 minutes. As she moved away, leaving him to his task, Jason found himself staring after her, a new understanding beginning to form. The Commander Hale he had dismissed as a mere PT instructor was revealing herself to be something else entirely, A combat veteran, shaped by experiences he could barely imagine carrying lessons written in the blood of fallen comrades. For the first time since the training began, he felt a genuine desire to meet her standards, not just to complete the exercise. Back at the academy, the afternoon brought another downpour, sending cadets scurrying between buildings with hunched shoulders and raised collars. In the corner of the mess hall, Michael Chen and Annie Prescott had been joined by several other cadets, all speaking in hushed tones about the day's unusual events. "Reynolds has been gone all day," said Davis, the broad-shouldered cadet who had struggled with the stretcher the previous day. "Nobody's seen him since before dawn." "Commander Hale, too," added Annie. "All her regular PT sessions were reassigned to Sergeant Miller." Michael leaned forward. "I heard from Jefferson and admin that Colonel Whitaker authorized some kind of special training evolution, something about leadership development under adverse conditions. For pushing an instructor." Davis shook his head. "That's more than just punishment detail." Annie's expression was thoughtful. "I don't think it's about punishment. I think it's about assessment." "Assessment for what?" asked Chen. "I'm not sure," Annie replied, "but I found something interesting. A few years ago, the Navy established a pilot program for integrating women into special operations roles. It was classified at the time, but some details have since become public. One of the first participants was a Lieutenant Eleanor Hale." A stunned silence fell over the group. "Are you saying our PT instructor is some kind of special operator?" Davis finally asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "I'm saying there's more to Commander Hale than we've been told," Annie replied. "And whatever's happening with Reynolds today, it's not standard Academy procedure." The cadets exchanged glances, each processing this revelation in their own way. The Commander Hale they had met, calm, precise, uncompromising, suddenly appeared in a new light, her methods and manner taking on deeper significance. "If she really is special operations," Michael said slowly, "then Reynolds might be getting the kind of training most of us will never experience." "Lucky bastard," muttered Davis, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of Reynolds' good fortune. As the afternoon wore into evening, rain continued to fall across the academy grounds, transforming the carefully manicured lawns into soggy expanses and filling the air with the constant patter of droplets against windows and rooftops. In the administration building, lights burned late in Colonel Whitaker's office as he reviewed the day's reports. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. "Enter," he called, not looking up from his desk. General Reynolds stepped into the office, his expression a careful mask of professional neutrality, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed his concern. "It's 2100 hours, Marcus. My son has been in the field for over 16 hours. I think that's sufficient to make whatever point needed making." Whitaker set aside his papers, gesturing for the general to take a seat. "The training evolution has a designated endpoint, Tom. Commander Hale will conclude it when the objectives have been met." "And what objectives are those exactly?" Reynolds asked, remaining standing. "Because from where I stand, this looks less like leadership training and more like some kind of unofficial SEER course." "SEER is survival training," Whitaker replied calmly. "This is character development." "Character development." Reynolds' controlled facade cracked slightly. "My son has been crawling through mud and playing war games since dawn." Whitaker leaned back in his chair, studying his old friend. "Tell me something, Tom. When you were coming up through the ranks, who was the officer that influenced you most?" The question seemed to catch Reynolds off guard. "Colonel Frank Harrison," he answered after a moment. "My 1st Battalion commander in the Gulf." "And what made him influential? His technical knowledge, his tactical brilliance?" Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "His integrity. The way he led by example, never asking anything of his men that he wouldn't do himself." A faint smile touched his lips. "He once took over a night patrol after I complained about the conditions. Taught me more about leadership in those 8 hours than a year of West Point." "Exactly." Whitaker nodded. "Some lessons can't be taught in a classroom, Tom. They have to be experienced, often under difficult conditions, guided by someone who's walked the path before." He stood moving to the window that overlooked the darkened training grounds. "Eleanor Hale has walked a harder path than most. What she's teaching your son today may well save his life or the lives of those under his command someday." Reynolds was silent for a long moment, the only sound in the office the soft patter of rain against the window glass. "You still haven't told me who she really is, Marcus." Whitaker turned from the window, his expression solemn. "That's her story to tell, not mine." But I will say this, if I were selecting officers for the most challenging command positions, Eleanor Hale would be at the top of my list. Before Reynolds could respond, Whitaker's phone buzzed. He answered, listened briefly, then hung up. The final phase is beginning. They should return within 2 hours. He gestured to the chair again. I suggest we both get comfortable, Tom. It's going to be an interesting debriefing. Midnight at Westbrook Military Academy. Rain continued its relentless assault, turning pathways into shallow streams and gathering in murky pools across the training grounds. The main campus building stood dark and silent, but lights still burned in the administration block, where Colonel Marcus Whitaker and Major General Thomas Reynolds waited in tense silence. They should have reported in by now, Reynolds said, checking his watch for the third time in as many minutes. Whitaker remained calm, hands folded on his desk. Eleanor operates on her own timeline. The exercise concludes when she determines the objectives have been met. And you've given her complete autonomy in this. I have. Whitaker's tone left no room for debate. Her judgment in these matters is beyond reproach. The general paced the length of the office, his controlled exterior beginning to crack. My son has been in the field for nearly 20 hours, Marcus. In these conditions, without proper preparation. Tom, Whitaker's voice softened slightly. Jason is physically strong, mentally sharp, and genetically blessed with your family's legendary stamina. He'll be fine. It's not his physical condition that concerns me, Reynolds admitted, stopping at the window to stare out at the rain-soaked darkness. It's what this does to his standing among the other cadets. His path to command will be stronger for this experience, Whitaker finished firmly. Leadership isn't bestowed by family name or academic excellence, Tom. It's forged through challenge, failure, and growth. Eleanor understands this better than most. Before Reynolds could respond, the office phone rang. Whitaker answered, listened briefly, then hung up. They're back, meeting in the tactical operations classroom in 20 minutes. Relief flickered across the general's face, quickly masked by professional composure. I'd like to observe. Whitaker hesitated, then nodded once. As long as you understand that this is Commander Hale's evolution to conclude. No interference regardless of your rank or relation. Understood. Across the campus, in a small locker room adjacent to the physical training facility, Cadet Jason Reynolds stood under a scalding shower, letting the hot water sluice away layers of mud, sweat, and exhaustion. His muscles screamed with each movement, protesting the punishment they had endured over the past 20 hours. His mind, however, remained curiously clear and focused. The final phase of Commander Hale's educational experience had been the most challenging, a tactical infiltration of the simulated compound, retrieval of the hostage, and extraction to a designated rally point, all while evading the enemy forces patrolling the area. Jason had been given minimal equipment in a 2-hour window to complete the mission. What should have been straightforward had become a grueling test of adaptability when Commander Hale introduced unexpected complications. The hostage was injured and unable to walk. The primary extraction route became compromised. Communication equipment malfunctioned at a critical moment. Through it all, she had observed, silent and unreadable, appearing occasionally to witness his decision-making, but offering neither assistance nor guidance. It was as if she were evaluating him, not just as a cadet, but as something more. Now, as he dressed in the fresh uniform he'd been provided, Jason found himself replaying moments from throughout the day, analyzing his performance with a critical eye that seemed newly calibrated. Mistakes he would have previously defended or rationalized now stood out as clear failures in judgment or execution. Decisions he would have been proud of now appeared merely adequate. Something fundamental had shifted in his perspective. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. 10 minutes, Cadet Reynolds, called an Academy staff member. Commander Hale requests your presence in tactical operations. Acknowledged, he replied quickly, finishing with his uniform. As he straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The face that looked back at him seemed older, somehow, the eyes holding something they hadn't before. Whatever Commander Hale's purpose had been, Jason suspected she had achieved it. The tactical operations classroom was typically used for senior-level strategy courses and mission planning exercises. Its tiered seating faced a sophisticated presentation area equipped with multiple screens, mapping technology, and secure communication systems. At this late hour, the room would normally be dark and empty, but tonight it hummed with subdued activity. Eleanor Hale stood at the central console reviewing data on a tablet, while several Academy staff members arranged materials nearby. She had changed into her service uniform, the dark blue fabric a stark contrast to the mud-streaked training gear she'd worn throughout the day. The gold oak leaves of her rank caught the light as she moved, reminding all present of the authority she carried. Colonel Whitaker entered from a side door, followed by Major General Reynolds. Their presence caused a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, the staff members standing slightly straighter, their movements more precise. Eleanor looked up, acknowledging them with a professional nod, but continuing her preparations without interruption. When Jason arrived moments later, he paused briefly at the threshold, taking in the assembled senior officers in the formal setting. This was clearly more than a simple debriefing. With military discipline, he moved to the position indicated by a staff member standing at attention before the presentation area. "At ease, Cadet," Commander Hale said, setting aside her tablet. "Today's evolution has concluded. We will now conduct a comprehensive review of your performance, decision-making process, and adaptation to changing circumstances." She gestured to the screens behind her, which illuminated to show satellite imagery of the training grounds marked with Jason's route throughout the day. Overlaid on the map were timestamps, decision points, and performance metrics. Cadet Reynolds completed all assigned tasks within established parameters. She began, her voice carrying the same calm authority it had throughout the day. Navigation was efficient, evasion techniques were adequate, and mission objectives were achieved despite intentionally introduced complications. She turned to face Jason directly. "However, technical proficiency is not the primary measure of success in this evaluation. The core objectives were to assess leadership potential under adverse conditions, decision-making during periods of extended fatigue, and adaptability when confronted with incomplete information." Eleanor moved to stand directly in front of Jason, studying him with that same penetrating gaze that had unsettled him the day before. Now, having experienced 20 hours of her training methodology, he better understood what lay behind that look, the weight of real combat experience, the knowledge of what failure meant in environments where mistakes cost lives. "Your initial approach to this exercise was flawed," she continued without judgment, simply stating facts. "You treated it as punishment to be endured rather than an opportunity to be embraced. You focused on completion rather than comprehension." Jason remained at parade rest, his expression neutral, despite the criticism. "This shifted during the reconnaissance phase," Eleanor acknowledged. "When presented with information about Lieutenant Brooks and the consequences of tactical tunnel vision, you demonstrated a capacity for broader strategic thinking. Your subsequent planning incorporated multiple contingencies and prioritized mission success over personal comfort or accomplishment." She gestured to one of the screens which displayed his hand-drawn plan for the hostage extraction. "This represents sound tactical reasoning developed under significant physical and mental strain, a crucial ability for field commanders." Colonel Whitaker stepped forward. "Commander Hale requested this special training evolution not as punishment, Cadet Reynolds, but as assessment. Your actions yesterday revealed both potential and limitation. Today's exercise was designed to address both." Jason's eyes flicked briefly to his father, who stood observing with an unreadable expression, then back to Commander Hale. "Permission to speak, ma'am?" "Granted." "I believe I understand the purpose of today's evolution now, ma'am. It wasn't about physical endurance or tactical skill. It was about perspective." Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested approval. "Elaborate, Cadet." Jason chose his words carefully, aware of the senior officer's attention. In a classroom or standard training environment, failure has a minimal consequence. Pride can override judgment because the stakes are artificial. Today, you created conditions where fatigue, uncertainty, and continuous pressure made the stakes feel real. He straightened slightly. "You wanted me to experience leadership as it exists in actual combat, where decisions affect lives, where mental clarity must be maintained despite physical exhaustion, and where mission success depends on understanding the complete operational picture, not just immediate tactical objectives." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. Eleanor studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Correct assessment, Cadet Reynolds." She turned to address the room. "This concludes the formal debrief. Colonel Whitaker, General Reynolds, thank you for your attendance. Cadet Reynolds will remain for additional instruction." The dismissal was polite but firm. Colonel Whitaker nodded once, placing a hand on General Reynolds' shoulder to guide him toward the exit. The general hesitated, looking as if he might speak to his son, but military protocol prevailed. With a slight nod to Jason, he followed Whitaker from the room. The staff members quietly withdrew as well, leaving Jason alone with Commander Hale. Once the door closed, Eleanor's posture relaxed fractionally. She gestured to a chair. "Sit, Reynolds. You've been on your feet long enough." Jason sank gratefully into the offered seat, his exhaustion suddenly overwhelming, now that the formal review had concluded. Eleanor took a seat across from him, her expression softening slightly. "You performed well today, better than many experienced operators would have under similar conditions." Coming from her, the simple statement carried significant weight. Jason felt an unexpected surge of pride more meaningful than any academic honor or family recognition he had previously received. "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated, then asked, "May I ask a question?" "Go ahead." "You mentioned Lieutenant Brooks several times today. He was more than just a fellow officer to you, wasn't he?" Something flickered in Eleanor's eyes, a brief glimpse of the person behind the professional facade. "Daniel Brooks was my team leader on my first deployment with SEAL Team 6. He taught me most of what I know about combat leadership. When that RPG came in, he didn't hesitate. He put himself between the blast and the rest of us." She looked away, briefly gathering herself. "His last words to me were an order, 'Lead them home.' I've carried that with me through 186 missions since then." Jason absorbed this understanding, for the first time the true weight she carried, not just rank or authority, but responsibility born of sacrifice. "Is that why you're here?" he asked. "At the academy, I mean. Instead of still being with the teams." Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully, as if deciding how much to share. "After my last deployment, the doctors found a small piece of shrapnel near my spine, a souvenir from that day with Brooks. Nothing immediately dangerous, but enough to make the doctors nervous about further high-impact operations." She shrugged slightly. "The Navy offered medical retirement. I refused. Colonel Whitaker offered this position, instead a chance to pass on what I've learned to the next generation of officers." "Like Brooks did for you," Jason said quietly. "Exactly." She leaned forward, her expression intent. "Which brings me to why you're still here, cadet. I didn't put you through O'Day's evolution simply to teach you a lesson about pushing your superior officers." She reached into a folder beside her and withdrew an official-looking document. "This is a recommendation for your consideration in the Joint Special Operations Command's Advanced Leadership Development Program. Only 3 cadets from each class year are nominated. Colonel Whitaker asked me to assess potential candidates." Jason stared at the document, momentarily speechless. The JSOC program was highly classified, but widely rumored among ambitious cadets, a fast track to elite command positions in the military's most prestigious units. "Today was an evaluation," he said slowly, understanding dawning. "The first of several," Eleanor confirmed. "Your performance merits continued consideration, but the final decision will depend on how you progress over the coming months." She slid the document back into its folder. "This isn't about family connections or academic standing, Reynolds. It's about the qualities that can't be taught in a classroom: judgment under pressure, adaptability in chaos, humility in leadership. Qualities you look for in special operations candidates," Jason said. "Qualities I look for in anyone who might someday hold the lives of others in their hands." Eleanor's voice held absolute conviction. "Your actions yesterday showed immaturity and entitlement. Your performance today showed potential. Which one defines you moving forward is entirely your decision." She stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Report to the medical office for evaluation, then get some rest. Regular training resumes at Oak 100. Jason rose to his feet, exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the face of this revelation. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity." As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him. "Reynolds," he paused at the door. "Ma'am, in the field there are no shortcuts. No family names to open doors. No second chances when mistakes cost lives." Her eyes held his, unflinching. "Remember that regardless of where your career takes you." "I will, Commander." And for the first time since arriving at the academy, Jason Reynolds meant it without reservation. The following morning brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine, as if the previous day's rain had washed the world clean. The academy grounds glistened, puddles reflecting blue sky and white clouds, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and new possibility. At 0550, cadets began assembling on the parade ground for the morning physical training session. Word had spread rapidly about Reynolds' special training evolution, though details remained sparse and speculation ran wild. The atmosphere crackled with curiosity and anticipation. When Jason arrived at 0555, conversations hushed momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. He looked different somehow, his uniform as immaculate as ever, his posture still military perfect, but there was a new quality to his bearing. The arrogance that had previously defined him seemed tempered, replaced by something quieter and more assured. Michael Chen and Annie Prescott approached him cautiously. "You made it back alive," Michael said, attempting humor to break the ice. "There were bets you'd wash out before sunset." "Wouldn't have blamed you," Annie added. "Davis heard from the observation team that Commander Hale had you running some kind of Seer Light program out there." Jason offered a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was educational. Before they could press for details, Commander Hale arrived striding onto the field with her characteristic quiet confidence. The formation snapped to attention, all eyes forward, but minds buzzing with unasked questions. "Good morning, cadets," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the field. "Today, we begin a new phase in your physical training curriculum. The events of the past 48 hours have made it clear that traditional approaches are insufficient for preparing future officers for the realities they may face." She paced slowly before the formation, studying faces, noting reactions. "With Colonel Whitaker's authorization, I will be implementing specialized training modules based on methodologies developed for advanced operational preparation. These are not punishments or extreme challenges for their own sake, but carefully designed experiences to develop essential qualities that cannot be taught through conventional instruction." A ripple of excitement moved through the cadets. Special operations training methodologies were rarely accessible to regular academy students. "Each of you will be evaluated on individual merit," Eleanor continued. "Performance, attitude, and adaptability will determine your progression through the program. This is not a competition against each other, but against your own limitations." She stopped directly in front of Jason. "Cadet Reynolds has completed the first such evolution. His experience will serve as a baseline for developing personalized assessments for each of you." All eyes turned to Jason, who maintained his position of attention, gaze fixed forward. The previously unthinkable had occurred. Jason Reynolds, son of Major General Thomas Reynolds, had been singled out not for preferential treatment, but for what appeared to be the most grueling training the Academy had to offer. Beginning today, physical training will incorporate elements from actual field operations. You will be pushed beyond conventional limits. You will experience controlled failure. You will learn that true leadership emerges not when conditions are ideal, but when they are at their worst. Eleanor surveyed the formation, her expression serious but not unkind. "Not all of you will advance through every level of this program. Some will find their strengths lie elsewhere, and that is not failure. The military needs diverse talents and perspectives. But all of you will leave this academy better prepared for the responsibilities of command than when you arrived." She nodded once, a gesture of absolute certainty. "First evolution formation, run 12 miles full gear. Cadet Reynolds will set pace. Begin now." As the formation moved out, falling into running formation with Jason at point position, a subtle but significant shift had occurred in the Academy's hierarchy. Jason Reynolds was no longer viewed simply as the general's son or the top academic performer. He had endured Commander Hale's special training and return changed, a transformation visible in his demeanor and acknowledged by the Academy's most enigmatic instructor. While they ran, Michael managed to position himself beside Jason. "So what really happened out there?" he asked between measured breaths. Jason maintained his pace, eyes forward, voice steady despite the exertion. "I met the real Commander Hale. And," Jason glanced briefly at his friend, "she's unlike anyone I've ever encountered. What you see in PT sessions isn't even a fraction of who she is." "There are rumors," Michael ventured, "about her background, special operations, combat deployments." "Not rumors," Jason replied quietly. "Reality." Ahead of them, Eleanor ran with the same measured efficiency she always displayed, setting a challenging pace without appearing to exert herself. The scar on her neck caught the morning sunlight, a visible reminder of whatever truth lay behind the whispered speculations. The day progressed with an intensity that left cadets exhausted but oddly invigorated. Commander Hale's new training regimen incorporated tactical movement decision-making under pressure and team coordination exercises unlike anything in the standard curriculum. Through it all, she maintained that same calm, observant presence, pushing without breaking, demanding excellence without cruelty. By late afternoon, as cadets dragged themselves toward the mess hall for dinner, the initial shock had transformed into reluctant respect and genuine curiosity. Whatever Commander Hale represented, whatever specialized knowledge or experience she brought clearly offered something valuable beyond conventional military instruction. Jason sat with Michael and Annie, all three too tired for extended conversation, when Colonel Whitaker's voice came over the Academy's announcement system. All cadets report to the main auditorium at 1900 hours for special briefing. Attendance mandatory. Dress uniform required. Speculation erupted immediately, the fatigue of the day temporarily forgotten, as theories flew around the mess hall. Special briefings were rare, typically reserved for visiting dignitaries or major announcements affecting the entire academy. Maybe it's about Commander Hale's new program, Annie suggested. Or maybe they're finally going to explain who she really is, Michael added. Jason remained silent, focusing on his meal, but a subtle tension in his posture suggested he might know more than he was willing to share. At 1900 hours precisely, the Academy's auditorium filled with cadets in dress uniforms, faculty members, and several visiting officers whose presence added to the occasion's significance. The room hummed with subdued conversation until Colonel Whitaker strode onto the stage, followed by Commander Hale in her full-dress naval uniform. The sight silenced the room instantly. Gone was the PT instructor in simple workout clothes. In her place stood a naval officer whose uniform jacket displayed ribbons and decorations that told a story of extraordinary service, combat action ribbons, unit commendations, and, most notably, the Silver Star prominently positioned above all others. "Attention," called a senior cadet, and the room snapped to perfect stillness. Colonel Whitaker approached the microphone. "At ease, cadets. Tonight's briefing serves two purposes. First, to formally introduce an officer whose full background has until now been withheld for operational security reasons. Second, to announce a new specialized training initiative that will enhance Westbrook's leadership development program." He gestured to Eleanor, who stepped forward with the same quiet confidence she displayed in all settings, though now it carried the unmistakable weight of formal authority. Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hale joins us from the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, where she served with distinction through 14 deployments and 187 combat operations. As one of the first women selected for integration into Navy SEAL tactical units, Commander Hale brings unprecedented experience in leadership under the most demanding conditions imaginable. A stunned silence fell over the auditorium, followed by a ripple of whispered exclamations. The rumors had not only been true, but had significantly understated the reality. Whitaker continued, "Commander Hale is a recipient of the Silver Star for actions during Operation Enduring Freedom, where she assumed command of her unit after the death of her team leader and successfully extracted wounded personnel under heavy enemy fire. Her subsequent service record remains largely classified, but I can say without reservation that she represents the highest standard of military leadership and tactical excellence." He turned to Eleanor, gesturing for her to take the podium. She moved forward, surveying the assembled cadets with that same measuring gaze they had come to know during PT sessions, but which now carried new significance. "Thank you, Colonel Whitaker." Her voice remained as it always had, calm, measured, authoritative, without volume. "Cadets of Westbrook Academy, I've observed you for the past month, assessing your strengths, your weaknesses, and your potential. Many of you possess the fundamental qualities necessary for military leadership. Few of you understand what that truly means in environments where theory meets reality." The screens behind her illuminated with combat footage carefully selected and sanitized for this audience, but unmistakably real. Dust-covered operators moving through destroyed buildings, medevac helicopters landing under fire, teams executing complex tactical maneuvers in hostile terrain. "Leadership is not about rank or authority," she continued. "It is about responsibility for mission, for personnel, for decisions that have permanent consequences. No classroom can teach you how decisions feel when lives depend on their outcome. No simulator can replicate the clarity that comes when fear and duty occupy the same moment." Her eyes moved across the auditorium, seeming to connect with each cadet individually. The program Colonel Whitaker has authorized will provide a taste of that reality. Not through artificial hardship or pointless suffering, but through carefully structured experiences that replicate the mental, physical, and emotional demands of actual operations. She gestured to the side of the stage where several faculty members and visiting officers stood. These instructors, all with extensive combat experience, will assist in implementing this curriculum. Participation at basic levels is mandatory for all cadets. Advancement to higher tiers will be by selection only based on demonstrated aptitude and growth potential. Eleanor paused, allowing the magnitude of this announcement to register. Then, in a subtly different tone that commanded absolute attention, she added, "This is not about creating elite operators or special forces candidates. It is about ensuring that every officer who graduates from this academy understands the weight of the responsibility they will carry, the responsibility for the lives of American service members who will look to them for leadership in moments of crisis and chaos." The auditorium remained absolutely silent, cadets absorbing the significance of both the woman before them and the program she described. Yesterday, she continued, Cadet Reynolds experienced the first iteration of this training methodology. His performance was commendable, not because he completed all assigned tasks, but because he demonstrated the capacity to learn, adapt, and prioritize mission over ego under extended pressure. Jason sat perfectly still as hundreds of eyes turned briefly toward him, but his expression remained composed, focused forward on Commander Hale. Each of you will face your own version of this challenge in the coming weeks. Some will excel. Others will discover that their strengths lie in different aspects of military service. All of you will emerge with a clearer understanding of who you are and what you're capable of when tested beyond conventional limits. She straightened slightly, her bearing shifting almost imperceptibly from instructor to commander. In Afghanistan, I served under Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, an officer who embodied the highest ideals of leadership. When an operation went catastrophically wrong, he gave his life to ensure the survival of his team. His last order to me was simple: lead them home. The personal revelation fell like a stone into still water, rippling through the auditorium. This wasn't just professional instruction. It was a mission born of sacrifice and honor. That is the standard against which I measure leadership, Eleanor concluded, and that is the standard I will hold you to during your time under my instruction. Not because I expect perfection, but because the men and women who will eventually serve under your command deserve nothing less than your absolute best effort. She stepped back from the podium, nodding once to Colonel Whitaker, who returned to address the cadets. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The woman they had known as their PT instructor had been revealed as something far more significant, a combat-tested special operations officer who had faced the realities they had only studied in theoretical terms. As the briefing concluded and cadets filed out of the auditorium, conversation remained subdued, processing the implications of what they had learned. Jason moved quietly through the crowd, aware of the glances directed his way, but focused on his own thoughts. Annie caught up with him in the courtyard outside. "You knew, didn't you, before today's announcement?" Jason nodded slightly. "Some of it, not everything." "What was it like?" she asked. "The training." He considered for a moment, searching for words to describe an experience that had altered his perspective in ways he was still discovering. "Clarifying," he finally said. "Like having everything you thought you knew about yourself and leadership stripped away, leaving only what's real." Annie studied him with newfound respect. "And Commander Hale, what is she really like when the gloves come off?" Jason looked across the courtyard to where Eleanor stood speaking quietly with Colonel Whitaker and several visiting officers, her dress uniform gleaming under the courtyard lights, the silver star catching occasional flashes of brightness. "Exactly who she appears to be," he replied. "Only more so." The next morning, cadets assembled on the parade ground at 0600 as usual, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. Where once there had been grumbling, casual conversation, and the relaxed posture of routine, now there was alertness, anticipation, and a new respect bordering on reverence. Commander Hale, Lieutenant Commander Hale, Navy SEAL, combat veteran, approached the formation in her standard PT uniform as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The cadets no longer saw just an instructor. They saw a living embodiment of the leadership ideals they aspired to, someone who had faced fire and death and emerged to pass on the lessons learned. Good morning, cadets, she began exactly as she had every day before. Today we focus on tactical movement and team coordination. Cadet Reynolds will demonstrate the proper techniques based on yesterday's instruction. Jason stepped forward without hesitation, moving to her side with a crisp precision that reflected his new understanding. As he began demonstrating the techniques she had taught him, Eleanor observed with that same measuring gaze, occasionally offering small corrections or additional insights. The other cadets watched with unprecedented focus, not just following instructions, but trying to understand the principles behind them, the combat lessons embedded in seemingly simple movements. And as the morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the parade ground, something remarkable was happening at Westbrook Military Academy. A new standard was being established, a higher calling being defined not through regulations or tradition, but through the quiet example of a woman who had endured fire and emerged stronger, who had lost comrades and carried their memory forward, who had pushed beyond conventional limits to discover what leadership truly meant. Eleanor Hale watched her cadets with guarded satisfaction, seeing potential where once she had seen merely pride and protocol. Jason Reynolds, moving through the tactical demonstration with newfound humility and precision, represented a beginning, the first of many who might one day understand what Lieutenant Brooks had taught her in those final moments in Helmand Province. Lead them home, not just from battlefields or hostile territories, but from the darkness of ignorance to the light of understanding, from the comfort of theory to the clarity of experience, from who they thought they were to who they might become when tested beyond their limits. That was her mission now. And as the cadets of Westbrook Academy moved through their exercises with new purpose and determination, Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Hale allowed herself a moment of quiet hope. Mission accepted, Lieutenant Brooks. I'll lead them home.